Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships, and I've got a pair of tier 6 battleship games for you today and a pair of hopefully somewhat familiar names. Now we're actually starting off with Jack the Ripper, and if you're thinking that seems an odd name in the context of World of Warships, well, that's because you're probably familiar with him as a console player for World of Tanks. But he's been trying his hand at World of Warships, and as you can see, he's been having a go at the Germans. And it's a pretty good line to go for a less experienced player. But having said that, he's not a bad player at all. And I think that experience of having come from World of Tanks, jumping into warships and being at least somewhat familiar with how wargaming likes to do things in their games, I think that has helped him. And also just the situational awareness that you build up, because he is a fairly good tanks player. So we've started off with that being his first damage. We actually jumped a couple of minutes forward into this game, but that was the first real action that Jack saw, and well, it was pretty nice. But a broadside cruiser at that range, if the guns behave, then yes, they are in trouble. However, he's also discovered a bit of trouble himself in the form of a Japanese destroyer, the Shinonome, which is, I think, the only destroyer they've got left. I think they had another one, but it had died prior to that. But although he is going to take some hits, it looks like 2 is his lot, so he very sensibly, as you should, waits until he knows the danger is past before he hits his damage control. So they've pressed forward a little bit now. The Shinonome died to somebody else, and there's a big mass of ships with him on this side. The team was a bit scattered on this one, but they have enough ships here together and enough concentrated firepower to still make this a viable proposition. They're probably going to lose that Congo, and the New York that's in the southeast corner is a bit isolated, but he might last a little longer. But if they can basically just hit targets sufficiently hard en masse, despite the fact that quite a lot of the enemy team are still very healthy, they can do this. But if they all just split and fragment and go and do their own thing, then it's not going to go well. So they're in the process of capping B, and there's another broadside cruiser. Hello, Nuremberg. And, oh, well, another Citadel. Didn't quite delete that guy as he did the first guy, but still not bad. Now, he's turning here to get more of his guns around, but that's a little bit risky because there's a Fuso at just about 10.5 kilometers and closing. But fortunately for Jack, the Fuso is not paying attention to him at all. So although this is not maybe an optimal position, he's getting away with it because of the things that can shoot at him. I think the Nuremberg is... there we go, yeah, the Nuremberg's put some shots his way, but the Fuso's just ignoring him totally. So Jack could afford to do that. And as it turns out, this Fuso's only firing HE anyway, so not the best player. So obviously, this is the priority target right now, but there's a Bayern slightly to the north dancing around with a friendly Nicholas to be aware of. And as for the rest, well, they've dealt with the New York, they dealt with the Congo a little while back, so, oh, that was a nice hit. No Citadel, but still 12k. Yeah, so they have to wrap up with these battleships reasonably soon, and it looks like that Bayern's not doing so well, the enemy Bayern. So, oh, there we go. Is he flooding, maybe? Oh, yeah, that's got to be flooding. So it really is just this Fuso that they can focus on right now. So despite being broadside, I think Jack's was the only really big hit that this Fuso took. He's obviously taken a bit of damage from elsewhere, but it looks like the New Mexico that's behind Jack didn't manage to get in a big salvo of his own, unfortunately. So there's a possibility this Fuso might get away before the remains of the enemy team come steaming round into view. But they have at least weakened him. So it's not all bad news. If you're wondering, by the way, and I have got the sound in this one turned down rather low, if you're wondering why it sounds like he's scraping up against an enemy ship, or just against an allied ship, I should say, continuously. It's that scraping metal sound. There's a bug with the 0.63 replays. Well, there's probably multiple bugs with the 0.36 replays, or 6.3 rather. Wow, I got the numbers the right way around there. Totally, yes. Yeah, so occasionally replays. He didn't actually collide with an allied ship for the entirety of this battle. At the first sort of like minute and a half, 2-minute mark, around then, for some reason it just started. It was a bit peculiar. I suspect it's in the replay itself, although it might have been in the game. I did actually try re-recording this with exactly the same result, so yeah, that's why it is rather quieter than normal. So that Fuso is being harried but is not yet dead. Isn't really the biggest threat anyway, I think, that particular player, just because, I mean, if you're top tier in a Fuso and, well, actually no, technically it's a tier 7 game, but there were only a couple of tier 7s. But if you get this kind of matchmaking in a Fuso and you're still firing HE at people, yeah. Now, for some reason, and rather inexplicably, the New Mexico has chosen to go up around the D line. And that pretty much leaves Jack on his own with this Graf Spee. So the destroyers are both pursuing the Fuso. The New Mexico can't really fire at much of anything right now. He might have little windows in between the islands where he can get some shots off. But basically, it's Jack and this Graf Spee versus this Tier 5 battleship platoon. And Jack has slammed on the brakes here, because it's not just them, it's also the Shores that's left alive as well. It's the entire remaining enemy team now that the Fuso's done. So rather than ploughing face first and have it be 4 versus 2, he checks his speed a bit, and I think he's just wanting to maybe hold his distance, keep his options open. And I think honestly that's probably, under the circumstances, the right thing to do. I would have myself probably tried to turn, use the cover of the little island in front of him while the battleships were passing behind it, and set course sailing away from them, but at such an angle that I could actually still keep firing. However, Jack didn't do that. He kept going forwards, and now he's in this position. So having taken, and that must have been a citadel from, I'm not sure, possibly the Koenig. It's not a great place to be right now, but the main immediate threat, the Shores, with the short but deadly 4-kilometer torpedoes, he's been taken care of, and he actually put his own torpedoes out at the Graf Spee. So that just leaves Jack versus these battleships. So the Koenig, in principle, isn't that big of a threat, but it all depends on your angling, because the Koenig's guns are they're reasonably accurate, and they have a reasonably good rate of fire. It's actually getting a bit of a nerf in the next patch, the Koenig. They're going to reduce the sigma of the guns and make it less accurate, which is a bit of a pity, because it then leaves you with the penalty of having smaller caliber guns with no particular benefit. I suppose it'll still have the faster reload, but I don't know, maybe it was just doing a bit too well with the stats. So it's actually the Nicholas that gets the kill on that Koenig, although Jack has done the lion's share of the damage. Next interview is the Texas, and he health-wise isn't doing too badly, and the advantage obviously of being in this is he's going to be a lot harder to citadel, although somebody I think has already managed it. It's not impossible to citadel a German battleship, it's just a lot harder. But he can still take a buttload of regular penetration damage. So he's doing his best to keep his angle against 2 targets here. Now he's got a nice broadside on this Texas, and is able to absolutely punish him. So if his secondaries can finish him off, that just leaves the New York. And there we go, there's the close quarters expert. So he really didn't take a lot of damage in return from that, because he was able to keep his angling at that point. So it's just him and this New York, and well, the New Mex has finally come round to a position where he can actually hit, but there we go, he just repeats the performance for the Kraken, and just is able to absolutely devastate those last 3 battleships. So of the 3, it was really only the Koenig that I think did a significant amount of damage to him. So he ended that match with 168,000 damage done. Kraken, close quarters, devastating strike, high caliber and Confederate, and was easily the top of his team as a result. So considering he's rather newer at this game than World of Tanks, I think that was a pretty good performance. And yes, the Bayern is a rather newcomer-friendly ship, but even so, 168k damage in that matchmaking, and going up against those 3 battleships at the end there, which I think was the main thing that amused him, that he came out of that and survived. Yeah, it was not a bad match at all. It was actually it was a fairly creditable performance. Next, we have Pricey Gaming, and if you have been around Circon stream for a while, you'll probably recognise that name. In fact, Pricey does a fair bit of streaming himself these days. Not just warships, I think he's done a reasonable variety of games. The other one that springs to mind particularly is Ark Survival Evolved, which is that rather silly crafting survival game where you can tame dinosaurs, because reasons. But yeah, he does play warships reasonably often as well, and he's also going to have quite a good game in this particular ship, the Fuso. And there was I think just because the Bayern and the Fuso, I mean, they're both such good ships in their own way, and the New Mexico is as well. It just kind of seemed natural to pair these replays together. Plus, they're both friends of the channel, I can put it that way. So, yeah, it was a nice fit in a variety of ways. And also, as an additional little thing, they're both Tier 6 battleships in Tier 7 games. Although, once again, it's actually pretty good matchmaking. There's only a couple of Tier 7s. So, Pricey started off trading fire with this Nagato at rather long range. And it's not been a great series of trades. He's done 15k damage overall. Not all of it to the Nagato. I think he got some hits in on something else. But he's lost about 10k damage himself already. So, he's got to be a little bit careful here. At this range, he's unlikely to take any super huge hits, but I mean, making these kind of maneuvers, and oh, there we go, making these kind of maneuvers can go rather badly against you, and that was a bit of an unlucky shot at 17 kilometers to have gotten penned by that, and having taken a citadel from those big Nagato 16-inch guns. But there's a lot of RNG with playing battleships, so yeah, this was not a particularly good early trade. He's now down to about 3/4 of his own health, and he really hasn't done a significant amount to that Nagato at all. So he's switching his focus elsewhere, with the Nagato continuing to sail west. I mean, they've got a couple of their own ships in the A point, but there's a fair number of the enemy team there, and given that we're almost 5 minutes into this now, I mean, it looks very much like the enemy team has split somewhat evenly between west and east, so there's not any particular concentration of enemy ships. There's not one big blob between 2 cap points in particular. So what they have to do, given that their own team does have most of their ships over on this side, is they have to really overwhelm these guys here and then turn around, take the middle, and deal with the ships in the west. So at least that's the theory. So once again, broadside cruisers, and this time at rather long range, but still, that's a paddling. That's why you don't do that. The cruiser that Jack met early in the game, I mean, that might have just been a lack of situational awareness, but that for attacker, I mean, he had to know. He had to surely look at his minimap and realise quite how many enemy ships there were up here, and to just sit stationary, or more or less stationary, sideways like that, that's just asking for trouble. Absolutely asking for trouble, and trouble is what found him. So one hit on the Nicholas, but somebody else landed a good couple of hits there as well, so that's one less enemy destroyer to worry about. There's a Koenig lurking just around the limb of that island, and a couple of other things to the south as well. But it looks like they do have them really on the defensive now. I mean, they're pushing on these guys. They're not just milling around and not doing much, because that would be kind of fatal if they want to actually win this match. They have to take these ships out. They have to either push them away or, better still, just obliterate them completely. And with this earlier not particularly great start to the match, his unsuccessful trades with the Nagato, it would be quite nice if Pricey himself didn't have to take the lead here, especially as their own Nagato's over here. But he does have enough range that, and against these enemies his armour is good enough that he can comfortably get a little bit closer, as long as he keeps his angling. So hoping for a repeat performance on the Emerald, whom he's already managed to get a citadel off of. Or was that the other Emerald? Because I think there are two enemy Emeralds in this particular one. It's, I mean, he's not got a lot of health left, this guy, so it's not going to take a lot to kill him. And the Koenig is also doing very, very badly. So the Emerald smokes and maybe will get to live for a little bit longer. There's also another destroyer that was spotted down that way somewhere. I can't quite tell what the minimap label is. It overlaps with that other Emerald. So yeah, there are maybe some ships to be wary of. Not so much the Emeralds, but that destroyer and the enemy Miyoko, who seems to have withdrawn quite a long way. Oh, not Miyoko, Miyogi! Well, that's not a Miyoko at all. I saw MY on the mini-map, and again, it's a little unclear. Yeah, that's something I maybe should have pointed out earlier. And I did actually... This is one of these ones where I recorded the footage days ago, and then... yeah, I'm just kind of going by memory here. But no, yes, there is actually a failed platoon on the enemy team of a tier 4 and a tier 5 that platooned up together, and or divisions rather, because this is warships. And it did not go well for them. They got pulled into a tier 7 match, because that's what happens to tier 5s. And so there's a Miyogi in a tier 7 match. Now, he does have 14-inch guns, but he's only got 6 of them, and the accuracy is fairly terrible. And his armour's fairly terrible. So... yeah, he's not particularly going to have a good time. So that's one of the Emeralds down. The other one has gone into the cap circle for some reason. And, well, you can see exactly how that went. The destroyer that was here, which was Ageda, has pulled back and is now dealing with their own Koenig, which for some reason... I mean, he'd gone into B and capped B, but instead of then pulling back... he's gone forwards to engage the enemy, and that is most of the rest of the enemy team at this point, so that didn't go well for him either. So, so far so good. It's actually kind of worked out. They have pressed round, they have dealt a significant amount of damage to the enemy team in terms of taking down a good chunk of their cruisers, and if they can take down the Miyogi, well... I mean, it's one less battleship, but it's not the most important target. And there's actually a danger here that these ships, because there's, what, 4 ships here, including Pricey, all just completely tunnel vision on the Miyogi. And meanwhile, the enemy team pushes across and starts picking them off while they're trying to pelt this guy at range. And that's actually what's starting to happen. The Nagato is once again firing at Pricey, and I think this is the point where he realises, oh yeah, no, they're starting to push across. It'd be nice if their own Nagato would realise that as well, because honestly I think they could just afford to not completely ignore this guy, but like there don't need to be so many ships firing at him right now. And this might be a little bit of a miscalculation on Pricey's part, or it might just be that the fact that it's a Miyogi and he's just getting a bit frustrated that he's not really finding any purchase. He's had 1 or 2 good hits, but he's also had some rather annoyingly apathetic hits where he's, you know, done maybe 1,000 damage from a superstructure overpen. So, despite the fact that the Miyogi does have fairly terrible armour for a battleship, he's just refusing to quite lay down and die, but surely, there we go, he seems to be on fire, surely this will be it. So the enemy team's now seriously starting to press across. They've capped B, and there's a T-22 that's making a run on the Nagato, but the Nagato has got friends, so that's probably one less ship they're going to have. And there we go, the Gearder actually burnt down that Myogi, so he's done for. And once again, broadside cruiser, and there we go. Nice. Didn't quite kill him, but he gave him a good hard smacking, so somebody else might well be able to finish off that now very low health Jaws. They do still have a rather healthy Nagato, though. That's kind of the linchpin of the enemy team. I don't know what that Jaws is doing. I really don't. It's a bit bizarre. So nobody else really has managed to, like, I think he's taken 1 or 2 HE hits from elsewhere, and I don't know. That was a rather unsuccessful salvo, unfortunately. I'm not quite sure why he made that spread. Maybe he figured the Straws would suddenly start accelerating forwards. But no, that's what you don't do. In a cruiser, you don't sit broadside like that. That's just very poor play. So, what's next? Well, the Nagato is lurking to the north, and I think this is the point where Pricey's realising that this is actually getting a bit awkward. He can turn now, and oh, there we go, nice hit into the Warspite. But if the Warspite puts his, oh, this is not good. Ouch. Okay, yeah, that was bad. Yeah, he could either do that and take the risk with the Warspite, or he could have kept going on his course and then given his side to a Nagato. So it was one of those times when you suddenly realise that you're in a bad spot and you just have to take a risk one way or the other. And I think he would have rather risked the Warspite's 15-inch guns than the Nagato's 16-inch guns. But either way, this is not so good. That was a huge chunk of health to have lost, and he can't really get much back at this point. So he needs this Nagato, his own Nagato, to take the lead. Unfortunately, he's got a fair chunk of health, but that's because he's, I don't know, he's not taken the early hits, obviously, that Pricey took, and then they've both carved this somewhat circuitous path down the 8 and 9 lines, and it's not really put them at the forefront of the action so much. I should also note at this stage their Belfast, who is still alive and kicking. He's not got a lot of health, but he is going to turn out to have a rather good score in this one, so he is worth just noting on the mini-map and, you know, seeing what he's doing. And I think what he's doing at the moment is probably smoking and firing a lot of HE. So up to 138k damage, but it's not going to take a lot more to kill him at this point, and rather than go for the angled Warspite, he decides to go for that New York, who's rather more broadside, and just one less battleship shooting at them right now would be useful, even if it's the less dangerous, or the least dangerous even, ship that's left on the field. Well, in terms of its guns anyway. So this is not ideal. They need to finish one or both of these ships fairly quickly, and fortunately for Pricey, they're not focusing him, even though he is the lowest health target. Although having said that, the New York's taken a terrific battering as well. But Pricey is able to finish off the Warspite. The Nagato finishes off the New York, and well, the Belfast, I think, has been setting fires and doing HE damage all the while as well. So that just leaves this Nagato, who's still quite healthy, and a pair of destroyers. And the destroyers have basically been, like, they could have made life very difficult for the Belfast, and instead they've gone to harass the Nagato. And that might prove to be somewhat decisive, because if the Belfast can recap B, they will regain their point gain advantage, because they are still ahead on victory points, but it's quite a close thing. And if they lose this Nagato, if they lose Pricey, it could easily swing back to the enemy team's favour. But with a nice broadside Nagato to fire at, well, Pricey's actually been getting some pretty chunky shots. So although there weren't any citadels in there, he's already done, what, like 30k plus damage in the last 2 salvos. So this Nagato is looking like he went into this with a relatively high amount of health, but he was then the only thing that they could shoot at. So 3 versus 1. Yeah, and especially giving broadside to Pricey. And Pricey learned the hard way himself earlier on why that's a bad idea in a battleship. But Matt Nagato then committed exactly the same mistake. So I've sped things up a little bit here because it's just now those 2 destroyers. The Belfast is capping, giving them a very firm advantage. And there's the Anshan, and there's the Gator. So that's interesting. They've split up, and the Anshan's actually really low health. And he could turn his guns all the way around, or turn his ship all the way around and try and point his guns at the Anshan, but he trusted that the Nagato would be able to handle it, given that he was very low health, and fortunately he was. Now, he could have popped his spotter at this point, which would have given him a little more advanced warning, but it's entirely possible he didn't want to mess up his artillery view, because of course you pop the spotter, and especially trying to hit a destroyer at close ranges, it can really make things actually far more difficult than they need to be. So there's the Gator. We know he's possibly still on torp reload, though he might not be at this point, but it doesn't matter, because with that salvo he just obliterates him and ends the match. So that was 193,000 damage in a Fuso. Even better than Jack's result, and Jack's result was pretty damn good. So on the team list, you can see there, by far in the lead, but the Nagato and the Belfast didn't do too badly at all. They both had, in fact, exactly the same XP. I don't know how it decided who was ahead of who when they both had 1443 XP. Yeah, it just came down to that last couple of ships really going above and beyond. And although it wasn't a flawless game by any means, Pricey definitely lost too much health early on. He finished it off in fine style and walked away with a pretty good result. So there we are, the Tier 6 battleships. They, generally speaking, tier up relatively well. And both those games, I mean, they both had pretty good matchmaking, even though they were technically Tier 7 games. But even in Tier 8 games, there are still things you can do in the Fuso and the Bayern particularly. The New Mexico maybe struggles a little more with its speed. The Tier 6 battleships that do struggle more with being down-tiered are the premiums. The Dunkirk most of all, but the Arizona is not so great if there's a carrier about, because it's got the rather weaker AA. And I'm trying to think if there's another one. Not yet, anyway. Oh, the Warspite, there we go. Yes, of course there's the Warspite. Yeah, the Warspite, again, because of its speed, and it doesn't have fantastic armour. It's not as vulnerable as the Dunkirk is, but you can take a lot of damage very quickly from higher tier battleships in a Warspite, and it's a little harder to react because it's not a fast ship. So yeah, the regulars though, the regular line battleships all do reasonably well for themselves, and in those two games they certainly did. So there will be links to Jack and Pricey's respective YouTube and or Twitch channels below. You can go and check them out. And well, all that's left to say is, if you enjoyed this video, you can leave any comments, you can hit the like button, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.